Hi, this is the recording for my final presentation for assessment in special education, where we had to answer 4 questions. So the first question is define a least restrictive environment and discuss this concept as it relates to models of delivery for special services. So a least restricted environment is defined in our textbook on page 40 as to the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities are educated with children who are non-disabled, and special classes, separate schooling, or other removal of children with disabilities from the regular education environment occurs only when the nature or severity of a disability is such that education in regular classes with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. So to break that down into a little bit more easier term to understand is that a least restrictive environment is the student's general education classroom where they are with all of their other classmates who may not have a disability or the same disability as them. The goal of IDEA in 2004, this is where they came up with the idea of the least restrictive environment because they felt that that is where children can learn best. So it requires schools to add on needed services in conjunction with keeping the student in the environment they learn best in as much as possible. So this may include, instead of taking the student out of the general education classroom, this may mean adding a para or adding in other supplementary services in the general education classroom, because this is where they learn best, and there's often vital information that the teacher explains during those lectures and activities in the general education class that they don't want that special needs student to miss out on. What is the goal of a least restrictive environment and those with special needs? It's basically to keep them in a normal daily routine as much as possible. You don't want the child to feel secluded, and you don't want them to feel left out just because they do have a special need. You want to be able to give them that the best education possible in the same environment as their peers. So in the little visual below, it kind of shows the least restrictive to the most restrictive environment. This is from a PBIS website, and it just shows that the least restrictive is the general education classroom, and if that doesn't work and you need to up it, you can put them in a special education classroom. This may be for part of the day or a full day. And then the next level is a special school that may specialize in special needs, like say they're hard of hearing, so they need to go to an ASL school. Then after that, it's homebound, where they are only able to learn at home and they're not able to go to school anymore. And then the most restrictive is a hospital or a residential facility where they would need to continue their education there. The least restrictive environment, or LRE, helps individualize education plans of disabled students. So for example, if 2 children with the same disability, for example, ADHD, they may not have the exact same IEP because they may learn differently. Every disability has different side effects, different symptoms, and we know with ADHD that there's 2 types as well. There's hyperactive and then there's inattentive. So just because they have the same disability doesn't mean that their IEP is going to look the same, and the least restrictive environment is going to be able to help tell them and differentiate that for them as well. Moving on to the second one, why is the education assessment process described as a cycle, and what are the components of the special education assessment process? So I'm going to start with the components. The first one is identification and referral. This includes screening and teacher identification of students with school problems, pre-referral intervention strategies, and referral and notification of parents. So this is when you kind of get the ball rolling. This is where you say, hey, I noticed that your child is struggling in this area, and like this is what I'm seeing, and this is what we think that the next step should be. The second one is determination of eligibility. This is the design of the individual assessment plan. This is different from the individualized educational plan. So this is the assessment plan where they determine how or if they are going to assess a student for special needs. You need to get the parents' permission at this time, and then you can get administration, scoring, and interpretation of assessment procedures involved. And then decisions about eligibility are made of whether or not they are eligible for special needs assistance. Number 3 is program planning. This is where the design of the individualized educational plan comes into, or the IEP comes into play. And then you also need to get the parents' consent for the IEP. We have learned in this class that parental consent is so important. And then number 4 is the program implementation and evaluation. This is when the IEP gets implemented into the classrooms that the child is in, and the parents should receive a copy, and the student's process is monitored, and the IEP is also annually reviewed and reevaluated. So going back to the first part of why is the assessment process described as a cycle, it's because it's constantly needing to be reevaluated as that child grows, as that child improves or regresses. You always need to come back to the assessment, or sorry, not the assessment, the determination of eligibility and the IEP. Is this working? Is this not working? Why is it working? Why is it not working? Should we change this? Should we keep it the same? All those questions are why that this is a cycle, because it's always evolving based on the child's grade, their progress, their age, and even their environment. For number 3, describe at least 5 strategies a professional can use to encourage family participation in the special education assessment process. The first thing that you can do is notify the parents. You always need to notify them of any meeting regarding their child with plenty of time in advance to give them the opportunity to attend. You always want to have the parents involved. It is always best for the child. Number 2 is to ensure that the parents understand any terminology or information along with the reason for any decisions or changes being made to their students' education. Be open to any questions. Parents are going to have questions, especially when there's confusing terminology or other terms that they may not understand. They might not know what an IEP stands for. You can't use all these acronyms without explaining it. You have to be able to explain every single thing that is being put down in this IEP to their knowledge so they understand, because you have to be able to get their consent to do all this and their approval. So that's very important. Number 3 is to schedule meetings at a mutually beneficial time. Work together with them. Make sure that you always are on the same page. This may include getting an interpreter or a mediator if they speak a different language than you, or if they're of another culture and they may not understand how this works. It's always important to have someone there that can help mediate those. Number 4, parents must get to receive a copy of their child's IEP at no cost to them. This is just to ensure that they always have a copy of it in case the school ends up not following it. That way they can advocate for their child. And number 5 is that, especially when parents cannot attend meetings, ensure that everything is recorded and all of the information is always sent. You want to make sure you record meetings, documentation, any changes of their child's behavior or disability throughout the classroom. You always want to be able to make sure that they are constantly in the loop. By making sure that they understand is the best way that you can encourage their participation in the educational assessment process, because their insight is so vital, because part of their disability may be about what's going on at home, or what do they do at home that maybe works for them and that you can bring into the classroom for their child. Number 4 is to compare and contrast 3 types of derived scores: percentile ranks, standard scores, and Stanines. I think I'm saying that correctly. I'm sorry if I'm not. And then tell how these scores are related to one another and to the normal distribution. So bear with me, because statistics was not my forte. But from what I have gathered, we're going to start with percentile ranks. Percentile ranks indicates the percentage of individuals within the normal group who achieved a raw score or a lower one. Standard scores, these transfer raw scores to a new scale with a set mean and standard deviation. This is useful for comparing the performance of the same person on 2 different measures. And then this also may help differentiate normals between age, gender, and other discriminators like that. And then Stanines, this is the type of derived score. This lists the percentage of cases expected to fall within each Stanine if raw scores are normally distribution. So what is normal distribution? Normal distribution is the distribution of data distributed naturally, which is kind of just rewording normal distribution. It's the distribution of data that is how it's normally distributed. This is also known as a bell curve, which is what we see in this visual right here. It has the percentage of cases of 8 portions on the curve. So you can see that right in the middle, they're 34.13%. That is like the average, where the most students would score, right? And then as it curves out, you can see that it gets lower and lower. So imagine this 0.13% being an F on a grade, and then this 2.14 to 3.9 to be a D to C, and then 3.4 to 13, that little area be a C to D, not C to D, a C to B, and then 34.13 to 13.59, C to, sorry, not a C to B, B to A, and then right out here it'd be an A. So basically, this shows where the average would be. And then we have the percentage of stannine listed at the bottom, and then we have percentiles and standard deviation, cumulative possessions, and all of that. So hopefully that helps you understand a little bit more. In our textbook, they have the results. So it also has a couple visual aids similar to this one, and that is how I equivalented all of these relating to one another. Another type of a standard score that is often available is a normal curve equivalent. These are normalized standard scores that were developed to assist in the analysis of student progress and federally sponsored educational programs. So basically, all of these fancy words are how we determine where a child ranks on a normal distributed curve. So yes, that is the final end of my presentation. I hope that made sense. I know that fourth and final question is a little bit confusing, but if you have any questions, feel free to email me, and thank you for a wonderful semester. I really enjoyed this class.